All right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to this webinar being offered as part of the Sustainable Tourism Community of Learning and Practice. We'll be getting started in just a minute. Please feel free to start by introducing yourself in the chat, letting us know who you are and where you're joining us from. And while you do that, we'll be holding on as a few more people join us, and we'll be getting started in just a minute. Good to see you, Brendan. Thanks for joining us for our service. See some other familiar faces here. Thanks for joining us, Francisco, from Mozambique. Bem-vindo. Matthew Jojonas from Lacey Consulting Services in Mexico City. Thanks for joining us, Matt. Hi, Steve McCool. Thanks for joining us. Good to see you in Montana. Mauro from Oak Journey, San Diego, formerly from Brazil. Good to see you, Mauro. Tudo bom? Let's see. See some other familiar faces as well. Others still being admitted. As you're joining us, I see others are still being admitted as we go. As you come in, please join us in the chat, letting us know who you are, where you're joining us from. Welcome, Aaron. Good to see you all here for this next webinar edition of our Sustainable Tourism Community of Learning and Practice. Let's go ahead and get started. We have exactly 1 hour for this webinar. We want to make the best use of time with our invited guests. This webinar, as I mentioned just a second ago, is part of our ongoing Sustainable Tourism Community of Learning and Practice, which is run by CSU's Center for Protected Area Management in partnership with the International Programs Office of the U.S. Forest Service. This ongoing community consists of a variety of activities, including webinars, a podcast called Protecting Hope, Tourism Talk Tuesdays, and a biennial conference also focused on sustainable tourism. This ongoing community is also linked to our 16-month Sustainable Tourism Program. And I see a number of our participants from our existing cohort that are logged into the session today. So thank you for being a part of this session as well. This session is being recorded and will be made available through our website to many of our community members that are unable to join these sessions live, either due to work or time zone constraints. During the session, we're going to be focused on the Teton County Sustainable Destination Management Plan in Wyoming in the Western United States. It's a really innovative, forward-looking plan that thinks about tourism from so many different perspectives. And we'll be learning about what led to the creation of this plan, what the plan looks like, and where Teton County goes from here. But let me first provide you all with just a bit of background about this session, run through a few details about how the session's going to work, and then I'll introduce you all to our invited guests, Crista Valentino and Mary Bess. And then we'll get started with today's presentation and conversation. This webinar will consist of 2 main parts, the presentation by Crista and Mary, and then the question and answers part, which will depend on the questions that all of you help us generate throughout the session. We are using Zoom meeting for this webinar, so we're going to ask for you to please keep your microphones on mute and add any questions that you might have for our speakers to the chat throughout the session. There may be some questions, and most of your questions we're probably going to leave to the end of the session, and Audrey Ramsey will be wrangling and sorting through those questions throughout the session. We'll collect those for our speakers to respond to at the end of the presentation. However, we'll also be keeping an eye on your questions in case there's any urgent burning questions that need to be responded to urgently at the moment that are just super relevant right at the time that need further clarifications. And if there's questions that pop up like that, we may pause our speakers who are very flexible and open to that kind of a format, and we might ask them to dive a little bit deeper right in the midst of their presentation so that we can kind of dive into the questions that you have at the time that they come up. Thanks for your understanding in advance if we're not able to get to all of your questions. We are fairly limited in time, but we will do our best. And as I mentioned previously, we will keep this to 1 hour in length. Now, with that background and context, let me go ahead and introduce you all to our speakers for today. Mary Bess has been a resident in Jackson Hole for over 20 years, where she has been working within the tourism industry, specifically in the adventure travel sector. For 18 years, she has worked in the rafting industry, spending 15 of those years as the general manager for the largest whitewater rafting outfitter in Jackson Hole. 5 years ago, she transitioned to the wildlife tourism industry, and she currently manages marketing and special projects for 2 of Grand Teton and Yellowstone-based companies with offices in Jackson, Wyoming, and Bozeman, Montana. Within the private sector, she helps manage conservation and sustainability efforts for both Jackson Hole Wildlife Safaris and Yellowstone Safari Company. She's a board member for the Jackson Hole Travel and Tourism Joint Powers Board and currently sits on the Sustainability Subcommittee. So thank you, Mary, for joining us. And we have Crista Valentino, who discovered the importance of community building when at 26, she founded Coalition Wild, a youth-led environmental NGO that has worked in over 125 countries to equip and mentor thousands of young people to develop conservation solutions in their communities. Actually, in fact, people on our own team have been a part of Coalition Wild. After completing her Master of Arts in Global Leadership, she now works to support socioeconomic progress through community-led development in areas committed to preserving their natural and cultural heritage. This passion has recently taken the form of relocating to Saudi Arabia in 2021 to facilitate the development of 5 nature reserves in the culturally rich region of Al-Lula and supporting native entrepreneurship on the Wind River Reservation through co-creating a business incubator program. After 5.5 years on the Jackson Hole Travel and Tourism Board, Crista was appointed as the board's interim executive director in January 2023. So thanks, Crista, for being here as well. So with that background, I know you all are waiting and anxious to hear more from Crista and from Mary and to learn more about what Teton County is doing with this destination management planning process. So let me turn it over to you all to share your presentation, and let's hear what you all have to share. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having us and inviting Mary and I to join you all. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, and if at any point that doesn't look okay, just raise a hand or let us know. But I'll start us off because I think it is important to set a little bit of context as we talk about sustainable tourism, what it looks like actually on the ground in communities, and what it looks like for our community in Teton County and Jackson Hole. And I'll set the stage a little bit, just trying to help you all understand the context of who the Jackson Hole Travel and Tourism Board is, what we view being a sustainable destination means, asking the question, is it even possible, and whose responsibility is it or should it be? And then why did we as a board, who is the main destination marketing organization for Teton County and for Jackson Hole, why did we decide to put this as a priority as we look for not only our 5-year roadmap, which our Sustainable Destination Management Plan is, but ideally into the future as a community-wide effort to really reach that goal. And then I'll pass it over to Mary to dive into the SDMP, and you'll hear that acronym often. It's our Sustainable Destination Management Plan, but that's really a bit of a mouthful. So we'll try not to throw too many acronyms at you, but it might, like disclaimer, there might be a little bit of alphabet soup at times, but I'll pass over to Mary to really dive into that process. So to start, as Ryan had said, I'm Crista Valentino. I've been on the Jackson Hole Travel and Tourism Board for about 5.5 years. In January, stepped in as our interim executive director, and Mary, who joins me, has been on the board for 2 years, I believe, going maybe into your third in June, or maybe into your second June. Anyway, she'll get into that. But so I want to start with outlining what the Travel and Tourism Board is. So to start, the Jacksonville Travel and Tourism Board, we often refer to it as the TTB, because again, mouthful. Our job and the board's job is to effectively spend lodging tax funds to promote travel and tourism in Teton County. So as I said, it's the main destination marketing organization for the destination. And we look to spend those funds in a manner that's consistent with the shared values of that communities. And even in our mission, before we started talking about sustainable tourism and being a sustainable destination, this mission was created. And so it encompassed noting the importance of reflecting the stewardship of our natural resources, highlighting the assets of our community. If any of you have been aware of or been to Yellowstone National Park, Grand Teton National Park, the Mountain West, it's an incredible, sometimes difficult to describe ecosystem that has incredible wildlife, a really great diverse ecosystem. It's one of the most intact ecosystems in the lower 48. It also still has the same big megafauna that Lewis and Clark saw when they were crossing on their journey across the Western United States. We have huge mountains, we have a small community, we have wild and scenic rivers. It's a really special place. And so our job as the board is to help promote the destination in a way that's consistent and highlights and shares the stewardship of that place. Our vision, again, written before we undertook the Sustainable Destination Management Plan process, was to be a world leader in responsible tourism. And we are specifically dedicated to developing a healthy and vibrant fall, winter, and spring economy that preserves our natural capital, again, that beautiful wildlife, natural heritage and culture, and that enhances the well-being of our community. So something I also want to pause here and mention is that historically, the Travel and Tourism Board has only promoted and marketed Jackson Hole as a destination in the fall, winter, and spring. You'll notice that I didn't say summer. Summer, we see a huge influx of visitors, and a big reason for that is our national parks, Yellowstone and Grand Teton. Jackson Hole is a great a gateway community for those places. So we see a really big number of visitors coming in the summer. So our job has historically been to promote those shoulder seasons, those slower seasons, to get people in times that maybe they wouldn't typically visit, in order to bolster our economy during those months.
Would you be willing to share just really quickly how that board is funded?
Yeah, and I am getting right there.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're great. That's a great segue. So the board is funded by something called the lodging tax. It is a 2% tax that is put on all lodging and room nights in Teton County. It used to be a tax that was voted in by Teton County residents. A few years ago, it actually switched over to being a statewide tax. So it is there no matter what. And so how that works, and I'll again get into, there's percentages. The state keeps, I'll make it really easy. The state keeps some of the money, Teton County keeps some of the money. Of that money that we keep, that is how our board is funded, and that is how we utilize the ability to spend the money. And so in Teton County, in the last year, $1.5 billion was generated in travel spending alone. And tourism has created over 7,000 jobs in our community. And that has equated to over $96 million in travel generated taxes. So when we think about just the importance of travel and tourism in our community, those number of jobs represent to over 22% of our total employment. And without those jobs, our unemployment rate would have been at 25%, which is pretty high. So travel and tourism, although, and you'll probably hear us talk about this, is sometimes creates this tension conversation within our community because it does create an impact and strain on our infrastructure and our resources. It's really important to begin the conversation by recognizing how much travel and tourism actually also does for our community in a big way. And I really personally like this stat because I think it sets the tone in a dollar amount of how travel and tourism positively affects our town. So as I said, we receive a portion of those 2% lodging tax funds. Without those funds that we get back into our community, without that tax, the local community would be paying over $10,000 more in taxes every year for existing public services. So how that works is Teton County receives about about $15 million a year in lodging tax funds, give or take the year. 40% of those funds goes to the town and the county. Those are our electeds, that is to their general fund. 30% of those funds, they get to decide how that's like public use to mitigate the impacts of tourism. So that would be for basic services like our public transportation systems. We get a lot of snow in Jackson Hole, so snow plowing our roads, paying for law enforcement services, things like that. 10% of their funds also go to their general fund for everyday general fund usage. So that alone, those basic services that 40% supports would cost our community individuals over $10,000 in additional taxes if it was not there. And again, I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you, but I'm trying to set the context of how important travel and tourism really is for a community way of life. Now, also moving into the larger context of travel and tourism on a statewide level, it is our state's, Wyoming, our second largest industry. And so the state of Wyoming saw over 8.2 million overnight visitors in 2021, and those visitors spent over $4.3 billion across the entire state of Wyoming. So when we're also thinking about how that generates jobs, we see almost 31,000 travel generated jobs in Wyoming, and that's about 7.6 of the total employment. So not only in Teton County are we seeing an importance of travel and tourism, but across the state of Wyoming, when we're looking at diversifying our economy away from an extractive industry, which is typically things like coal, natural gas, oil, things like that, tourism has really become this up and coming industry that allows us to diversify the way that we're bringing in money in a much more sustainable way, especially if it's done correctly, and in a way that allows us to honor and be stewards of, say, our natural lands, to promote culture and Western culture, which we're all very proud of. And really to also get people moving through a lot of these natural areas. We have 2 national parks. We have multiple national historic landmarks and state parks and things like that. So really trying to heighten the other ways that people or that the state can bring in money that is a more sustainable source of revenue. Now, when I move to the way that the other 60% of the funds that we bring in from the lodging tax, that is what the Jackson Hole Travel and Tourism Board manages. So to give you a number, our fiscal year 24 budget, which starts on July 1st, will be about $9.2 million. So pretty big numbers based on, again, this tax that's bringing in by our visitors, our tourism industry, our room nights, things like that. The Jackson Hole Travel and Tourism Board, our priority funding areas fall within 4 main categories. Number 1 is marketing. Again, we're the main marketing organization for the destination. We also spend a good deal of our budget on supporting local events. And so offering grants to events in Teton County, and they are able to use those funds to help stage the event, promote the event, market the event. And that falls into 2 categories. A lot of times we want to see those events trying to bring in or create events and bring in tourism. So we want to see a high bump in visitation during those event times, but also we support community character events. So we have over 250 nonprofits in Teton County, and many of them host events that uphold our community character, support our culture, give people things to do, support their things, everything from local food to promoting wildlife to even things like youth soccer and downhill skiing for for kids and sport tournaments, things like that. So we try to keep our money, or we do keep our money in Teton County through funding event grants. We also support partnerships. So the Travel and Tourism Board is a 7-member volunteer board who are appointed by our town and county electeds. So these 7 volunteers, Mary being one of them, also have full-time jobs. And so we are not able to, just because of our capacity, often do as much as we like to do. So we fund partnerships with local organizations who are doing the type of work that we want to see when we think about management. A couple of examples of that are, we recently funded a group called the Friends of the Bridger Teton National Forest. The Bridger Teton National Forest is this huge swath of land. It's a national forest that many times visitors and locals alike will go in to utilize for camping, for recreating, for trail. They have incredible trails, horseback riding, you name it. When we see a big inflow of visitors, they are going into our public lands and sometimes aren't educated or aware of how to be great stewards. What we're fearful of are human wildlife conflicts and potential unattended campfires that would maybe lead to a major wildfire taking place in our community. So we help to fund the Friends of the Bridger Teton to put ambassadors on the ground to do education and awareness building face-to-face on the ground, as well as online videos, things like that, to get people to recreate more responsibly. Another great partnership we have is with the Jackson Hole Nordic Alliance. They are promoting more Nordic activities during the wintertime. So Jackson Hole is very well known for our downhill skiing and kind of extreme skiing, but there's also incredible Nordic trails and things to do on that side as well. So the Nordic Alliance is also not only growing the amount of amenities that we can offer in the winter, but also putting people on the trails to make sure people are leashing their dogs or recreating again on these backcountry places responsibly. And then the final area that we prioritize our funding to is to sustainable travel. And Mary will talk more about that when we get into the SDMP, the Sustainable Destination Management Plan process. And to set the stage a little bit for that, in about 2018, we began talking about what it looks like to move our focus and our priority areas into being a sustainable destination. And it fell right in line with this trend that we are seeing across the traveler trend around the world. We are seeing that a lot of travelers and customers are looking for more sustainable options when traveling, and that a lot of travelers are also beginning to avoid destinations or places because they aren't eco-friendly or eco-conscious, or don't provide sustainable options and practices when they might be visiting. So as the whole industry is shifting, we also found ourselves asking the question of, why is it important? Like, how do we value and how do we define what success is as the travel industry, as a county, beyond just the number of visitors and room nights that we're selling? There's an old rhetoric that used to be said called heads in beds. You know, literally, how many people are you getting in? How long are they staying? And how much money are they spending? But as we're seeing that industry shift to what travelers are actually looking for and what they're prioritizing, it was important for us as a destination to also shift our tactics. Part of that shift also was coming from what we were hearing from the community. So we were seeing a big number of visitors, and that number increasing year over year, putting a very big strain on our community infrastructure and our local, our workforce, our services, our community services, things like that. So when we began polling and actually listening to our community, some of the numbers maybe weren't surprising, but were really strong in what they were asking for. We did a resident sentiment towards tourism survey about asking residents how they were feeling about tourism in our community. And 85% said that tourism development was occurring too fast. 84% said they felt unheard in being a part of the decision making. And 90% said that they support better planning and more strategic management of tourism. We also surveyed the Jacksonville Chamber of Commerce's business members. So this is the business community. And over 2/3 of them wanted the Travel and Tourism Board to not only focus on marketing and promoting the destination, but to focus on the sustainable management of the destination as well. So what we were hearing is that they wanted a heavier emphasis on management versus just simply driving demand and room nights, which really brought us to doing this year-long sustainable destination management plan process. And I'll pass it over to Mary for that.
So this process actually began long before I joined the board, with the selection of the partners that we were going to work with to steward us through this process. But in 2021, I believe that's when the contract was officially signed and we kicked off the Sustainable Destination Management Planning process. Next slide, please. So this phase 1 through phase 5 represents an approximate 16-month timeline from September 2021 to January of 2023, which is when we launched our plan. The first month or two was just getting all the contracts in order, and then George Washington University and Confluent Sustainability, who we contracted with to do this project with us, started doing their work and then brought us in after the initial discovery process. We did a lot of back and forth with them. They came out to Jackson and did several in-person validations at different stages so that they could present their findings, and then we could get in-person validations from the entire community. So this was a very deliberate and inclusive approach so that we could bring all the sectors of the community in on this planning process and really understand what it was that the community wanted out of a sustainable destination. How did we view ourselves in the future, and could we align those goals within the tourism industry to get us there? We launched the plan recently in January of 2023, and we are currently working through the year 1 initiatives. Next slide, please. So the first step of this was a discovery and validation process. This included a situational analysis report, which for us was the most comprehensive baseline assessment to date. We had really not had much of data collection or any kind of baseline setting prior to this. As Crista mentioned, we really had very few metrics to work from, heads and beds being one, emplanements being another, but this situational analysis really gave us sort of a lay of the land, so to speak. We also did a resident sentiment toward tourism survey that gave us a snapshot in time of where the community saw tourism at this moment. And if we can repeat that over and over again throughout time, then we actually have this initial resident sentiment to base against, and we can see our progress with future resident sentiment surveys. We did an analysis of online travel reviews. So they looked at TripAdvisor for a selected number of attractions in Jackson to see what was the visitor reaction to the area. Were they having a good time? Were there pinch points? Were there common themes that they could discover? And that was part of this discovery process. And then we also put together an SDMP steering committee. So we selected 18 members of the community that represented various stakeholders within the community, various groups, nonprofits, government officials. And these individuals met together a total of 10 times to review the back and forth process during the planning with George Washington University and Confluence Sustainability. We went over lots of different metrics. We went over how to present findings. We went over different pieces of the plan from start to finish. And this all happened over that 14-month process. We did 8 in-person focus groups, and this included 150 tourism leaders over 12 working sessions that included 50 community stakeholders, almost 5,000 resident responses to the sentiment survey, which in talking to other communities that were going through this process at the same time, far eclipsed their participation. So we knew at the beginning that we had a very engaged community, more than we even anticipated. The initial process was supposed to be a 9 to 12 month process. And the reason why it was so much longer for us is because we did have such an engaged community. And right from the beginning, we decided to sort of take a step back, dive into what everyone was saying, and really take everything to heart so that we could make this as inclusive a process as possible and get it right from the beginning. From this initial phase, we had a 75-page comprehensive strategic analysis that came out, and that makes one of the supporting documents for our final plan. Next slide, please. So what is the plan? It's a 5-year roadmap, and it highlights what we can do as Teton County to create this balance between our natural environment, the economic opportunities that we have within the tourism industry and other industries in Teton County, and that we can also have a vibrant community so that we can have a really good quality of life in the place that we live. It's a balance of these 3 points that the final plan is built on. The final plan is a framework. It's not very prescriptive, but it does have the structure, and we get to fill in how we do that moving forward. It also recognizes that these 3 pieces, the natural environment, the community itself, and the economic opportunities, are constantly in flux. And so it's going to take a dynamic solution to recognize that as things change, we need to change with it. Next slide. So for Teton County, we defined through this process that it is a balance. We need to balance the needs of the residents. The residents need to feel comfortable in their community and feel like tourism has positives, not only negatives. We need to recognize that economic sustainability for our businesses is incredibly important to retain the quality of life that we're used to. And we also need to welcome visitors and be a community that welcomes tourism for good. We live in a county where 97% of our land is public lands. So in a way, our community is not our own sometimes. Those lands belong to everybody. And so that's part of the balance, is enjoying with visitors something that belongs to all of us. So we're further defining that as we move through the process of implementing the plan. But the end goal is that we have tourism for good, and it's sustainable for our businesses, for our environment, and for the people. Next slide. So of this process, we defined 5 pillars that were most significant in terms of maintaining our community as a community first, and also protecting the land that we live on and enjoy, and also having vibrant businesses so that we have a workforce and people that make up our community. Each of these 5 pillars defines a outcome and provides suggestions for key performance indicators that we can track in the future as we build out from the plan, so that we have more metrics to track success than just how many people are arriving in our community, either by plane or how many people are staying in hotels. It's going to give us more metrics that touch on social indicators as well, which is something that we haven't had in the past. And that's going to help us measure that quality of life piece, like number 3. We also want to be good stewards of our public lands. We're the ones that live here, but we want visitors to be able to come. So we've got one of the pillars that focuses on our natural environment, which was feedback from our community that said this is one of our most valuable resources that we have, is our natural lands, the national parks, the national forest, the wild and scenic rivers. These are all things that we enjoy as residents as well. And so it's important for us to protect those. We need to preserve the quality of the economy. We need to have jobs. If you're going to live here, you need to have a job. You need to have a sustainable economy so that it continues into the future. Our quality of life is important. We choose to live here for a reason. We enjoy this community. We feel like we have a community, and that needs to be preserved. We also want visitors to have a quality experience. So when they come here, we want them to feel welcome. We want them to enjoy this place as we do, but also leave it better than you found it. And then we get into what does success look like, and what do we need to have in order to achieve that. To define these 5 pillars, if you remember, we did all the discovery and strategic processes, but then we validated all those with community members in person throughout this process. So this is truly the community vision. The new vision that you can read here is very closely aligned with our original vision for the Travel and Tourism Board. But this is more looking to the future and what we want to be as well. Next slide. So the stewardship goals that we defined are 8 different pieces. And within each one of these pieces, there are several initiatives to go through. I believe there's 78 initiatives in total. Crista can correct me if I'm wrong there, but each one of those initiatives falls into one of these 8 categories. This is a community plan. And so as you can see, when you look through each of these 8 goals, a lot of these things fall outside of what our board can fund or what our board is traditionally tasked with managing. So to do that, George Washington University and Confluence Sustainability really unrolled this all lands, all hands approach to doing this, which is basically getting different sectors of the community to work together in the context of a tourism scope to look at all these pieces and how we develop certain pieces of our community so that we have quality visitor experiences and we sustain both the social and the environmental aspects as well as the economic aspects of our community. The first thing we did in rolling out the plan was to develop a destination stewardship council. And it's this council that's helping us work through these 8 goals as defined by the plan. So it's not just our board trying to collect everybody to do this, but instead a group of individuals that represent multiple stakeholders in the community. It's actually a pretty good mirror of the steering committee that we used through the planning process. And this is the group that's helping us implement the plan and tackle these goals and year 1 initiatives. Next slide. So this is what we're doing right now. Within the plan, we were given priority areas for year 1, year 2 and 3, and year 4 and 5. So we're currently working through the year 1 priority areas with the help of the Destination Stewardship Council to advise our board on what to focus on, how to accomplish that. So within the transportation sector, we had an initiative that recommended we monitor and participate in a feasibility study that was going to be done in the county. And we've identified this as one area that we can move forward with. So we have a working group formed from the Destination Stewardship Council that is going to focus on reporting back on what that feasibility study is doing at the moment. Then we can make further decisions on year 2 and 3. We have, with education and communication, we were tasked with putting together a small task force or a working group to establish visitor education. So we've identified those individuals and we're working through how to put together a visitor management action team. They have yet to meet, so they'll be working through this project. We also have a grant that's going to help us identify a few pieces of this, which also ties in with the marketing and reporting from section 7, where we can establish a data bank or a destination dashboard that our board can use to make decisions for marketing, but also the community can use to make decisions in their own businesses. And then the big piece is a governance structure. So what's unique about Teton County as we went through this sustainable destination management planning process is we were doing so without a governance piece in place for the tourism industry. So we did not have a destination marketing and management organization. We just had a marketing organization. So this has been an interesting piece for us because where you would typically have a destination management organization working through this process and then having the ability to implement a lot of things, we're lacking that governance piece. So one of the biggest things that we need to put together and advise perhaps for our elected officials is how to design a governance piece that works for Teton County. The areas that we have on our year 1 priority that we have not addressed yet is traveler information portal or dashboard, workforce, and climate action. So those remain on the table for discussion from the Destination Stewardship Council. We're about 2/3 through our year 1 priorities, and they're all in progress. Next slide. I believe in the chat you'll see the full plan, but if you do want to see the full SDMP, you can view it here. You can also view all the supporting documents that go with it. So the SDMP itself is a 75-page document, but then there's about 400 other pages of supporting documents that go with it. So if you want to read through all of it, it is public and it is available on the website. And then Crista, I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, just making sure I'm still not on mute. Yeah, so I think Mary gave a really great overview of what this looks like in document form. And just to wrap up, I wanted to share two quick examples of how we're actually implementing this and what it looks like on the ground. So we are still, we haven't stopped. We aren't anti-tourism, right? As you saw at the very beginning, even though tourism has had its impacts and effects on our county and our community and our infrastructure, tourism is also the lifeblood in a lot of ways of our community. And so one of the areas that we're really able to shift is how we are communicating and branding and talking about Teton County as a destination. And in that, in those marketing campaigns, as we're talking to potential visitors, we're looking at shifting that to being more of a sustainable stewardship, educational awareness building message. And so these are some of the examples of some of the campaigns that we have recently run and we intend to continue to run. So giving people information like, when you're here, please take the bus, don't drive, stay on the trails, protect the place that you're coming to visit and leave it that way. Practice, have good practices, put out your campfires, things like that. And what we have seen actually is, as we've shifted this messaging over the last year or two, we've actually been seeing higher impressions, higher engagement, more people going to the website, more people talking to us and being interested in what we are doing because it's really resonating. I think that is twofold. One, I think we are hitting the type of, we're thinking about what type of tourist, what type of visitor do we want to come to town? And so as we're shifting our marketing, we're reaching that type of person better, so they're engaging more. And then we're also falling into the flow of what we're also seeing in the travel trends across around the world or across the country, as visitors and travelers are looking for more sustainable destinations as well. And as I mentioned earlier, we have these partnerships. These are three of the ones that we are, the board is continuing to support at pretty big dollar amounts, which is pretty exciting. And we're constantly looking for other opportunities. The board is a very much an opportunistic board, and gets excited when organizations come to us to ask for funding that we can, again, keep in Teton County to support the better management of our natural assets. And so I want to leave enough time for questions. And so we'll end it there and look forward to answering or clarifying anything that we've shared.
Great. Thank you so much, Crista. Thank you, Mary, for really providing us with that overview of the incredible amount of work that's gone into this, the planning process, and no doubt the incredible amount of work that you all have ahead of you to put this into place, and then figure out that governance structure that's going to allow it to keep moving on into the future. I think there's a lot of really interesting lessons learned from this process that can be applicable around the world. Obviously, Teton County and Jackson Hole specifically is a very well established and developed tourism destination. So I think it provides us with a snapshot of kind of one extreme side of the tourism picture. Many I think destinations around the world, and many of the ones that we work with, are on the other end of the spectrum. And so it's really great to look ahead to see what we can learn from destinations that are in an advanced planning phase, and maybe steal some ideas that we can incorporate earlier on in the process, so we don't have to go back and reconstruct, and maybe take advantage of some of this learning earlier on in the process and things like that. I think while many countries around the world don't have as much of a decentralized funding mechanism, like with bed taxes and all this kind of stuff, many countries around the world have ministries of tourism, and oftentimes those ministries of tourism aren't necessarily truly involved in sustainable destination planning yet, but could be could represent valuable dollars that could be contributing to sustainable tourism planning, and contributing to conservation and things like that. So lots of really, I think, really interesting parallels that we can be drawing, and we'll be continuing to have these conversations with our current cohort. I know for many of those that are listening that aren't part of the cohort will be jealous when I mentioned that we're heading to Jackson Hole and later in September, and we'll be looking even more at what's going on in the region with our group. So with that, let me pause and see if Audrey has been able to wrangle some questions out from the chat, and if there's any specific questions about the tourism board or about the planning process or anything specifically that we might want to throw towards Crista and Mary.
Yeah, thanks so much. We've had some great questions in the chat, lots from Bonnie, so thanks, Bonnie. And then one from Donald as well. So we'll start with those, but as we are answering these questions, please feel free to keep sending questions in the chat. Or just to raise your hand as well, and we can have you come off mute and ask a question as well. That's also a possibility. So I want to start with this question that Bonnie asked. One of the things that we're talking about a lot in our sustainable tourism community of learning and practice is diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's one of our 4 main pillars of areas that we're exploring throughout the program. So Bonnie asked, what is the Tourism and Travel Board doing to track and promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in its planning, and also the visitors that do or do not visit? And I can send that back in the chat too, if that's helpful.
Yeah. I suppose, Mary, if you want to jump in, feel free to do so. I think there's 2 different answers to this question. To track the visitors that do or do not visit, we have typically tracked maybe not the specific demographic in a way. We historically have tracked where they're coming from, how long they're staying, how much money they're spending, how they're entering the county, whether that is drive or fly, things like that. As Mary mentioned, one of the areas that we're looking to do is have better data and a more comprehensive set of data. And we are going to be working with the University of Wyoming in order to do that. And so we might have a better way of tracking who is coming and what demographic they are and all of that. But a lot of that data currently isn't incredibly robust or complete. But also to promote DEI in our planning. So there's a couple of answers to that. Because we are this gateway community to the national parks, and we have the national forests and a lot of outdoor areas available, we're lucky because many people are coming to visit those areas, and our public lands are our nation's lands, right? And so there is a lot that we can do to encourage people to know that they are welcome and welcome to explore and enjoy this space as well. An area we've also been working on and need to continue to do better at is showing more diversity in our marketing, like our photos, who's in our photos, who's on our website, even just by the look of it, to be more inclusive. But to be quite honest, we could do that better. As for how we target, we want to, this is a really sticky question, because when we think about the type of visitor that we want, ideally, and it was another question in here, ideally we want visitors who are staying longer, spending more, which is a certain type of visitor, while also providing the options for not shutting anybody out, not being exclusive, not being luxury. That's a really difficult space to manage. And a lot of that sometimes isn't based on what, quite honestly, what we're able to do. If hotels are having a certain price range that prices people out, we have a really difficult time managing that. So it's being inclusive and being accessible is something we talk about as a board, and we don't necessarily have a 100% perfect way of doing it and doing it well, but we're constantly asking that question of how can we show ourselves to be a place where everybody is welcome and to promote ourselves in that way, while also knowing that where we're marketing to is also a certain type of visitor for what our target audience is. And that might not be like the most politically correct answer, but Mary, please jump in, but I think it's the honest one.
Yeah, I think it also, one of the really good lessons learned that we had going through this process was almost immediate with our resident sentiment survey. We didn't put the survey in Spanish initially, and it was an oversight on our part. We have a large population of Latina in our community, and we did not address that adequately. We did not have enough representation on our steering committee, and we realized that we needed to have that resident sentiment survey in Spanish. So we've identified that for going forward, and we're still trying to get representation and trying to get engagement and trying to figure out how to best do that. So it's something we're working at, and as Crista said, I mean, we're not there yet. We just don't have the data to measure against first and foremost, but we're doing what we can identify right now moving forward.
So, Audrey, I don't know if we have time. I wonder, and I hate to not get to Comfort and Marina's questions, but since I know Comfort and Marina are going to be able to ask their questions directly in September in Jackson, I wonder if we might let get to Donnie's question real fast. Donnie Ledbetter's the tourism manager for the Park Service Washington office. So maybe get Donnie's question out there, and then sorry, Comfort, sorry, Marina, but we'll get to your questions in person in the spectacular Jackson Hole in September, if you're okay with that.
Yes, that sounds good. Thanks for that. Yes, okay, so Donald's question was, recently you all announced that the Teton County received fewer visitors in 2022 than in 2021, but that they spent more, like you were just talking on then, spending more time there and spending more money there. But so how are the businesses in the community responding to that change? Is that focus on yield rather than volume a better approach for the long term?
I can take that one, Crista, if you like.
Please.
Hi, Donnie. Good to see you again. So I think that this is a tricky situation. We saw a huge jump in hotel cost from a consumer perspective between our really busy summer of 2021 into 2022, and I believe that is a piece of what's driving that. I think it gets dangerous if it goes too far one way or the other, right? Like, it really is all about balance. If you have too much of high yield rather than volume, then you are going to shut people out of this community, and only certain people will be able to travel here. They just simply won't be able to afford it otherwise. So I think what is going to have to happen for our community is to develop this diversity of visitor and targeting very specific types of tourists coming through, whether you're coming in and driving with your family and doing a camping and a road trip to visit the national parks, or whether you're coming in for a very high-end luxury stay and you're arriving by your own private jet. So we have to have a balance. We have to have a diversity in our visitor, and the trick is going to be figuring out like what percentage is the right balance. I think if you continue to increase hotel rooms, yes, it alleviates the volume problem and the number of people visiting, but you also introduce additional problems as well. And it reflects on the businesses, the businesses that run activities, for example, in the area. When there's fewer hotel visitors, those businesses are not having as many people go down, and maybe they haven't adjusted their business, so they're going to see a dip and then they can finally adjust to that market. So it's constantly in flux. It's a dynamic situation. I don't think we have it figured out, but I think we might have a handle on like why certain things happen. I think with better data going forward, we'll also be able to adjust our marketing to be more proactive rather than reactive to that situation as well. I hope that answered that question.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the questions. Thank you all for attending, for participating. Thank you, Crista and Mary, for your time. We really appreciate you joining us and sharing your experiences and helping us learn a bit from the Teton County experiences throughout this process. We look forward to staying connected and continuing to learn as the years go on. I mean, it's going to be an ongoing learning process that we look forward to continuing to learn from you all. It's an exciting time. I'd like to encourage all of our listeners to check out the website for this ongoing sustainable tourism community of learning and practice so that you're aware of our upcoming events. Every 6 months, we post a calendar of activities on our website. We're currently working on our calendar of activities for the fall of 2023, which we should be posting by mid-June, so stay tuned. We'd love to see you back for future activities. In fact, one of our future podcasts will feature Crista Valentino. We've already recorded, but we haven't posted that podcast yet, so stay tuned for that. I'd like to recognize and thank the U.S. Forest Service International Programs Office for their partnership and support for this community of learning and practice, and I'd like to thank the U.S. Agency for International Development for their financial support. Best of luck to everyone out there. Travel safely and sustainably, and please stay in touch. We'll talk to you all soon. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.